So we asked for 13.5 million in appropriations this year. As you recall, under the consent decree, we can only spend a third of our allotment in the first year. So that's all we asked for in appropriations for this year. The timing, the first year of the trust is October to September. However, our spending in our budget is July through June. So we are saying that in the first year, starting July 1st of this year, that we asked for 13.5 million that we could realize and pass through to eligible projects through June 30th of next year. Those of you who are involved in state budget process, it is a long drawn-out process through the legislature. We are not in the final stages yet. I think the budget needs approved by May 11th. I was saying 7th this morning, but Lisa's here, so she corrected me, May 11th. So we won't know for sure if we have the appropriations authority until May 11th, but we have been working with those on the appropriations committee, both in the House and the Senate, to make sure that does not throw a wrench in the plans. Some of you that may be following the process, and I know have asked questions, we did have the appropriations in the House budget. The House Appropriations Committee actually did remove that because we didn't have the plan, and they didn't know where the money was going, and they wanted to see that, which is understandable. So we did get it planned on our schedule. I think we said we would be on public notice in March. Close. We went on public notice on April 2nd, I think.
It's close enough.
So we were very close.
32nd.
So, but we were on public notice and had a draft document in time for the Senate Appropriations Committee. So it is currently being discussed between the Senate and the House. So we feel confident, I feel confident that we'll get that. But if we don't, we'll probably come back and we'll talk about that. So I just wanted to address that because we did have some questions on that, and rather for somebody to ask that question. So we'll go into the comments. I did want to point out, many of you know Ron Leone with MPCA, Missouri Petroleum Marketers Association. He could not be at the meeting today, but he did submit comments and wanted to share them with the group. So I have a few here, and I left a stack on the back table if you're interested in those comments. Ron came to a past meeting and presented his comments. The comments on the draft plan are very similar. So, but if you want to see them, there are some here. So I will now open up to comments of people who are here. So. Yes.
I have a comment and a question. First of all, thank you very much for the effort you put on this plan. I've viewed a few different state VW plans, and all the people who worked on it. You've clearly put a lot of effort into it and a lot of thought that various states, some states haven't put that much effort and thought into it, but you clearly have, and just from that work standpoint, thank you for putting in that effort. My question is, there was a slide talking about the calculations, and it said miles used was a calculation. If the vehicle you're replacing doesn't do mileage but does a facsimile hours, that's a valid calculation metric, correct?
Jason, so for vehicles that are operating on the highway, miles is a pretty critical one. Fuel consumption also plays a factor, but I'm not 100%. Hours would not be an input for an on-road vehicle. For something that operates that's not authorized to operate on the highway, considered a non-road vehicle, then hours is what we would use.
But if it is an on-road classed vehicle, but its metric of time or usage is hours, that's the metrics that's used. And an example is a terminal tractor that you have, and you're dealing at a place where you have to move, your location isn't contiguous, so you have to have an on-road vehicle because you're driving on roads, but it still utilizes hours as its calculation of usage.
If you're utilizing hours, then we would probably calculate it in the same way that we calculate a non-road.
The vehicle it's replacing utilizes hours. That was,
sure.
Okay, so it's like for like.
I think so.
Okay.
We would have to look into it, but definitely submit a comment so that we can consider it fully when we finalize the guidelines.
Okay.
And I have a question pertaining to the same set of slides. Hopefully this mic's working okay. The column on the left where it says VW funds requested, as you're going through these examples of this Class 8 dump truck, I think you had one where there was different amounts requested. So in this category, Category 4, non-government trucks, no, this was government trucks, right? Category 2. But like, say it allows for 40% of funding if it's an engine repower, or 25 to replace it with a new vehicle. When you apply, it doesn't automatically put you at that 25%, getting to like that column where it says VW funds requested. You have the option as the applicant of making your application more competitive by, even though the plan would allow you to apply for as much as, say, $40,000, you can make your application more competitive by, say, only requesting $30,000. Is that the way the application process is going to be set up?
Yeah, Paul. So this slide in particular that you're looking at, slide number 21, that is the point we were trying to make with this slide, is that if you ask for fewer Volkswagen dollars for the same project, you're going to score much higher on your application than someone who asks for as much as the guidelines would allow.
Can you go back to the slide with the schedule?
Sure.
Which schedule?
That one right there, timing.
This
yeah.
one?
So my question is, so we have $13 million for the next, $13.5 million for the next fiscal year, and all 8 projects are up there. So how would that $13 million be distributed? Is that going to be equitable based on the mitigation plan, or do you have thoughts about, because you talked about DARA and DARA getting first choice, is that going to be, so there's $3 million, there's 10 left over, so 10 left over for the other 7, you understand what I'm saying? So.
Right. So for the DERA, we're just doing the 2018 funding, which is only going to be about $300,000. So the remaining, $2.7 million in that category is going to stay there and not be spent this year.
Okay.
And then for the award category number 1, school buses, our thought is at the 25%, we likely won't, because we're doing, any projects that don't get picked under DERA would get funded under award category 1. We have $12 million in that category. And so we were thinking for any projects that don't get picked, there should be a lot of money left over there. So that's another big chunk of money that's not going to be touched until 2019. EV charging stations as well would be 2019. Our thought was that with those 3 things combined, that we would be able to fully fund those other ones that say late summer on this category as early as this year. However, we need to make sure. I was going by what the trust and not necessarily our appropriations, because the trust would allow us as early as October of this year to spend 2/3 of it. And so if we only have legislative appropriations to spend 1/3 of it, we need to make sure that we take that into account in the final plan.
So I would just ask that perhaps the the implementation guidelines document be updated with a table that would show for year 1 what the anticipated monetary allocation to the individual awards would be. I would appreciate that.
I appreciate that, Jay. Now, the timing section of the implementation guidelines, it says they're all going to be fully funded. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 will all be fully funded. But I think we might need to update that with the information we now have about the appropriations.
Right. Got it.
And we will know by May 11th, which is when we'll be finalizing this, so we can put some more definite times in there.
Yeah, just to get back to the school bus fleet for a moment, and I'm sure that you have all already considered this because you have done just a stellar job of covering everything, but as a reminder, because may have been a while, you wouldn't want to go through this whole $41 million and still have the very most derelict school buses still on the road. And going back to my time at the AIR program, the rule of thumb, I don't know how it is now, that 90% of motor vehicle emissions on the road are coming from 10% of the, the worst emitters. So those are just some things I was thinking. And you probably have already got that when you covered the most, talked about having the most economically low areas of schools, but I just thought I'd throw that in. That's probably where you started at the beginning.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Molly.
Question?
Yes, on the phone? On the phone?
Yeah, it was sometimes a little bit difficult to hear the questions and the responses. Will a transcript of what went on be posted at some point?
So we'll have the video posted here probably pretty shortly, and the slides as well. But yeah, I'm sorry about that. You couldn't hear very well.
Thank you.
Yep. Hi, my name is Emily Weir. I'm with the electric vehicle charging company Greenlots, and we provide solutions and software for EV charging, and we have a couple of stations deployed across the state. And so I'm, also just want to reiterate how amazing of work you guys have all done on this, including the implementation guidelines, which is something that I haven't seen a lot of states put as much thought and care into as you guys have. So I really appreciate that. I just want to reiterate our support for the fast charging network that you have proposed across the state, as well as the 15% funding. This matches very closely with investments that's being made across the country in deploying more and more electric vehicle charging, and particularly the corridors, and facilitating long-distance travel. I think this is absolutely critical in getting more electric vehicles on the road and facilitating further adoption of EVs, increased market participation by companies like ours, and really kind of serving as a leader on this. So thank you very much for that, and we'd love to continue participating in this process moving forward. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions,
Mark,
comments?
do you anticipate the department crunching the numbers on these financially disadvantaged schools and actually creating a list of school districts who qualify for 3 out of the 5?
Boy, I think we were definitely, so the question was, is the department planning to actually identify the schools that are going to meet that financially disadvantaged, and then just have a list of school districts that would be eligible to apply? We hadn't really thought about doing that. It might make sense. I think we would have to consider, would you recommend that, Deborah, just to
Sure.
make it easier?
Well, and then you target those schools that,
Right.
you've obviously identified these schools as a priority to get this first round of money. So if they're already on the list, easy application process.
Sure.
That they know they're going to qualify and be part of that automatic lottery. And I think that'll help with what year are we talking about here, too.
Right.
You and I discussed what school year are we looking at, the latest data available, are we going to freeze the data?
Sure.
And use just 3 years that are currently available, or wait until 17-18 is out? So it's easily done.
Okay.
By some data people and actually creating that list.
Well, and I think it would probably be a very transparent way of doing it, too, so we definitely appreciate the suggestion. We'll probably be working with you, Deborah, to make sure we get those criteria right, and then, if we decide that a list is the best way to implement that, just to make it nice and easy for everyone to understand, then maybe we do that in the final guidelines, but definitely appreciate the comment.
Everyone's just looking around.
I have a few comments.
Anyone on the phone have questions?
Yes, this is Mona Menezes calling from Branson, Missouri, and I have a question for our budget planning purposes. Will this... Anyone on the phone have questions? Yes, this is Mona Menezes. Can you hear me?
Yes, and I would remind anyone listening on the phone, if you have your computer monitor volume up, to turn it down, because I'm delayed on the computer monitor, and so I hear myself, and so we're having some issues in the room here. So if you're on the phone and listening on your computer, turn the computer monitor down for a minute. And Mona, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, my monitor is muted.
Okay.
So for our budget planning purposes, I know how grants function, but not, we've never had a trust fund before. Is this something that the entity budgets for and pays for up front and is reimbursed?
I think that's likely the plan. We may make exceptions if there's an absolute need for it. You know, the state would have the option to make an exception, but I think in general,
Okay.
the state would prefer to have the oversight of a reimbursement program.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go again unless there's somebody else who hasn't spoken yet. Okay. Well, I have a couple comments on the plan, and well, first of all, it's really a pleasure to be here. You know, going back to 2016, when people were first hearing about the VW Settlement Trust Fund and trying to figure out what it was all about. From there to where we are now, it's been a pleasure to participate in the process and see how well it's moved forward with the work you've all done. So that is commendable. But I'd like to start my comments with referring to the summary table in the mitigation plan. It's on page 1 in the mitigation plan. And my comments aren't so much about the amount that's in the buckets in the 8 different categories as my comment is about the function of the bold line between categories 3 and 4. Now, $12 million for school buses, I'm actually glad to see that. And if you recall my earlier input in these meetings, I kind of advocated that we do as much to help schools as we can with this funding. So I'm not, like I say, I'm not really unhappy with the amounts in the buckets. But I'll go further in the plan, page 11. There's a statement there. It says the department is allocating smaller amounts to the award categories for locomotive, marine, airport, and cargo equipment because there were very few stakeholder comments directly supporting these projects. Despite the relatively low stakeholder support, these projects have high emission reduction potential. Therefore, these smaller funding allocations for these award categories could still result in comparatively large emission reductions. Well, first I'd like to comment on the amount of stakeholder input at those meetings. As far as schools go, we talked about the thousands of school buses we have in Missouri, hundreds of schools. Yeah, you can compare those numbers to the guys who have these NOx emitting boats going up and down the Missouri River. It's kind of hard for those guys to get off the river to even make it to those meetings, and there's far fewer of them to begin with. So there is some proportions to consider as far as that goes. But going to another chart in the plan on page 14, where it supports your point that these other categories have a major contribution to reducing NOx emissions in Missouri, and to just kind of staying, I guess what you'd say, the spirit of the law as far as what this settlement is the goals are to accomplish. It's reduction in NOx emissions, and it's great if we can also support other goals as well, like safer, cleaner school buses and help our schools. But we have to give some credence to the low-hanging fruit, I think, as far as what is going to reduce NOx emissions. And if you can refer to those numbers on page 14, with all the money, the $12 million we have allocated for school buses, it's 80 to 120 lifetime estimated NOx reduction in tons, while locomotive marine, with just that $2 million, and we've already combined two categories there, we're at 400 and 700. So and again, in this chart, you've got that bold line, and that's more my comment is the function of that bold line, and when you talked about in the implementation of this, that there's only going to be round line in these categories 4, 5, 6, and 7, and it's sort of a use it then or lose it kind of a thing. And that money very quickly, it seems, is going to rise to the top up to those other categories. I guess my comment is I think there's enough funding there to suggest that that money that is allocated for 4, 5, 6, and 7 be allowed to circulate down there longer and not be necessarily rise to the top so fast as the plan is structured to do so now. And I mean, I don't know, I guess I don't feel quite as strong about this comment, but since since the goal of NOx emissions reduction could be accomplished so well with, say, category 5, and if that money doesn't get spent, it's going to rise up there anyway, why not put some more there and give them a shot at it? I was talking to a guy this morning, he's with my company, and I was talking about that $2 million, and he said, I had lunch with guys yesterday, and just at lunch, we were talking about $2 million in projects. I mean, those projects, they're lower, they're going to be fewer projects, but they're going to be higher in dollars per project. But again, those are the low-hanging fruit of being able to accomplish NOx reductions. So the way to get towards what I'm talking about, I guess, is, like I said, allow the money to, one would be to allow the money to float around more between 4, 5, 6, and 7 before it rises to the top to 1, 2, and 3. Or if you might want to give some more to some of those categories to start with, since you're saying that if they don't use it, they're going to lose it, it's going to rise to the top anyway. So that's my main comment as far as the mitigation plan goes. One other comment with the implementation guide, just to make it, I guess you'd say, more user-friendly. I would suggest that there is a summary table, page 11 in the implementation guide, and I think it would serve a better purpose if you would put the cost, add a different column to it, an additional column to it that included cost sharing. If in my role, as I go around and talk to people about this, you know, you've got like 2 seconds, I mean, not 2 seconds, but, 2 minutes in some cases to try to explain to people, to try to get them to grasp what this is all about, and for them not to, I think we need a better summary table there for them to see the stakes that are in it for them as far as the benefits in this for them participating. And with just these 4 columns here, I don't think they can quite get that as easily as we would want them to understand it and try to participate in it. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I would comment a few items on that. First of all, I'm not sure if it's been said yet, because I swear I've been paying attention, but if you have a comment, we are taking notes and writing down everything you say, and we also have the video. But if you want to make sure that we get your comment as intended and word for word, please submit it in writing through our web portal or email to one of the group. We're doing our best to scribble down what everyone's saying, and there's lots of good conversation here, and we appreciate it. But especially as much detail as you were going into, Paul, it would be good to have some of that in writing as well. The other comment I want to make on the locomotive and marine, through DERA several years ago, we tried to do some tugboats, and so we have experience with trying to find people for these projects, and I think one of the reasons we landed on a minimum amount here is because we have struggled in the past to find those projects. However, I personally have talked with our communications director, and we've already started thinking about how to get the word out, not just through locomotives, but to promote more public availability of this once the categories are set and trying to find applicants. So we're not just going to throw this on our website and say, okay, if you happen to see it on our website, apply. So we are going to do some outreach as well, and I anticipate and ask you all to do some outreach, and it sounds like you're already doing that. So once it does become final and public and applications are open, we are going to rely on you to do some outreach, but we are going to do some outreach too for all of these categories and make sure that everyone who is interested has the opportunity.
Hi, just a comment on the phone. I'm one of the proponents for the locomotive and marine category. It's actually the most cost-effective and the biggest way to impact our health. And there is a lot of interest from short lines and Class 1 railroads, so I'm not sure why y'all keep saying there's not as much interest. I've personally come to you with several projects, so just know the locomotive community is out there, and they're definitely needing this money to help them as well. So
we like to
there's
hear that.
interest right here.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone have a comment? Okay. Andy?
Yeah, hi, this is Kelly again. Another question about the emission factors. I'll be sending in some comments following this, so I won't go through all my thoughts. But I do want to ask about the decision to include electric vehicles as 75% zero emission instead of actual zero emission, and what your thought process behind that was, because I'm thinking that tailpipe emissions is the reduction is the goal of this program, and that we didn't include, that we're looking specifically at tailpipe emissions from other fuel sources, and I'm just wondering what your decision looked like as far as that goes. Thank you.
Sure. So, Kelly, this is Mark. So the reason that we selected to say that, it wasn't fully zero emission is, obviously the electricity has to be generated in order to charge an electric vehicle, and we heard from stakeholders at our meetings that should be a consideration, and so we were trying to give weight to the commenters that made that point. It is a real point. We picked 25%. We wanted it to still be cleaner than pretty much any other vehicle, so that's why we settled on 25%. It's also easy, since we're going to be doing the calculations of the emission reductions, for us to implement and calculate what those reductions would be. However, we're certainly open to comments on this, and if folks feel strongly that it should be zero for electric, then we are more than willing to consider those, and it may wind up in the final plan. So please give comments and then give justifications and reasonings for why that should be.
This is Jerry Schechter in Kansas City. By that, along that same thought process, will you also then, for the non-electric, and be considering the emissions of production of petroleum goods and extraction of petroleum? So if you're going to consider non-tailpipe emissions for one, you should consider it for the other.
I think that's a fair point. We can go round and around on this, but I think we would definitely encourage you to submit your comments, and we will definitely take them into consideration.
No, Andy, you had a comment.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I just want to reiterate what others have said about our appreciation for all the hard work that you all have put into this. It's very clear that you have a lot of great minds thinking about this and have considered a lot of comments. We also appreciate the very open and transparent process that you guys have been implementing. We're not seeing the same thing in other states like Illinois. But I just, one comment, we'll submit comments obviously, but just one preview of one of our comments. We'd like to see some weight given to long-term cost effectiveness of these projects. And by considering the complete or the total cost of ownership over the lifetime of vehicle, including fuel and maintenance, so that we're making sure this money is spent most efficiently. And that's probably going to show that electric vehicles, which have low fuel and low maintenance costs, are going to come out ahead. And what we expect to see is that a lot of transit agencies will take those cost savings and then reinvest those into additional cleaner buses. So just something that sort of considers sort of the long-term cost effectiveness of these projects would be helpful in terms of weighing how best to spend the money. Thank you.
Molly, I think you had another comment.
Things are moving so fast. When you talk about tailpipe or emissions from an EV, of course, I think it's understood you're talking about the coal burning power plant emissions that most EVs are tapping into, getting their charging from at this point. And even as recently as a couple of years ago at the Missouri Energy Policy Conference, we had investor-owned utilities saying that at night when they don't get good usage of their coal-burning power plants, that's a great time to plug in EVs, and that they were going to, in Kansas City, they were going to help sponsor and promote EV charging stations throughout the city so that they could burn more coal at night and get good usage. But yesterday, the last 2 days at the Advancing Renewables in the Midwest Conference, we see how fast we are moving to renewables. So I'm with Show Me Solar. So it's very much on my mind when we talk about EVs, the realization that most of them are plugging into coal-burning power plants today. But I would not hold them back for a minute at this point. And it's very encouraging to see how fast we are moving to wind power is now, much less costly than coal, and solar, and energy storage. All of it is moving at lightning speed. So I think 25%, you've hit it about right for now. It's first pass, but things are changing fast. So good work again.
Thanks, Molly.
Could I just put a plug in sort of to respond? The Sierra Club has a EV guide website. I think if you just Google Sierra Club EV guide, you can find it. You can actually plug in your zip code and the type of electric vehicle that you might be considering buying, and you can see what the CO2 emissions are from the generation of electricity that goes into that, charging that electric vehicle. And even in Missouri, or even in St. Louis, I'm sitting right next to Pat from Ameren. If I had a Nissan Leaf, it would generate less CO2 than a gasoline engine, even with Ameren's. I think 70% coal-fired power currently. So that's one reason why Sierra Club, it doesn't work out in every community that way, but that's one reason why Sierra Club is supporting electric vehicles. Again, with the intent of cleaning up the entire generation mix and going to more solar and more wind. So, but even today, in many areas, they're cleaner from a CO2 purpose.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? People are ready to leave. I say an hour and a half is about my limit too, so. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it.